Welcome into another edition of the Front Office. I'm Tony Lombardi, joined by our capologist, Brian McFarland. We thought to do this podcast today in order to provide a little context to the Ravens' current cap situation, take a look at a few contracts that may be problematic for the Ravens and EDC moving forward, and to explore what, if anything, the Ravens can do in terms of acquiring players to help turn their so far disastrous 1-5 record around into the kind of season most people expected. Brian, how are you?
Good, good. How are you today, Tony?
Good, I'm good. Hey, I don't know if you saw this tweet today from Adam Schefter. He put out the playoff picture after 6 weeks. And you're looking at these teams, particularly in the AFC. The number one seed is the Colts. Number two seed is the Steelers. Number three seed is Chargers. Four seeds the Texans. Five seed is the Bills. Six seed the Jaguars. Seven seed the Broncos. So that's kind of crazy. And then in the NFC, the number one seed is the Bucks, followed by Green Bay at 2, San Francisco at 3, the Eagles at 4, the Seahawks at 5, the Lions at 6, and the Rams at 7.
Just like they drew it up, right?
Yeah. You could have made some big money if you picked those teams through
Oh
weeks.
boy.
But now the elephant in the room, as far as the Ravens are concerned, is Lamar's contract, and as far as you're concerned and the things that you do. And with nearly $75 million cap number that sits on the books in both 26 and 27. But I want to hold that off for a little bit. And before we get to some of these contracts, I wanted to get your assessment of Eric DeCosta's performance so far, starting with the offseason, where they are today. Where do you think he's made the biggest mistakes, both in personnel and contracts?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, and I think most said this too, 6 weeks ago, we thought this was one of the best teams in the AFC on paper, obviously. There was discussion of it probably being the most talented Ravens team ever. And I still don't think that's totally wrong. Obviously, the injuries are a thing. Underperformance is certainly a thing in a lot of cases. Um, and the offensive line is probably one place where I look the most. The two guards are, an issue. It would have been nice to have a veteran in here. I didn't mind them letting McCary walk, but having a veteran in here and I don't know, I'll even go back 2 years when letting Zeitler go is still to me a mistake. Although I guess he only lasted 1 year in Detroit, and then he's in Tennessee. So maybe they saw some writing on the wall. I didn't look to see what his numbers were last year, but obviously Detroit didn't really go after retaining him. He signed a very minor deal in Tennessee. So I mean, I think those are the two places, the trenches more than anything, and edge, I guess. They took the philosophy, and I don't know if this is DeCosta's philosophy, this is Harbaugh's philosophy of strengthening the back end and not really addressing. And the last two during the seasons, actually, they addressed the rush a couple times, and it worked out well for them. They haven't done that so far. So I mean, I would think that's kind of the place as far as personnel. Um, as far as contracts go, I mean, you never complain about the contract unless it doesn't work out. I guess Roquan Smith's is probably the one that sticks out the most. And do you allocate that kind of money to that position? I don't think many people were really complaining when he was traded here, had an all-pro type year, and then they re-signed him. I don't think most people were complaining about it then. Obviously, his performance since then hasn't been up to that level. But you also look at the young guys they've tried to, fill in around him, and that hasn't worked out either. So, I mean, I think that's probably the places to answer your question that I would look at the most, whether that's philosophy or just the way it worked out. But it's going to be this next year is going to be very interesting as well as we're probably about to get into.
It's kind of hard, in my opinion, to grade him because we don't really know the dynamics that go on between the personnel group and the coaching staff. We don't know how much the coaching staff is involved. If you look at some of the beat writers, they make it sound as though Eric has 100% authority over the roster, and I got to think that's probably not 100% accurate because he gets the coaches involved in the draft process. I'm sure they sit down and say, what kinds of players are you looking for? If we want to fortify the offensive line or the edge, what kind of guys do you want? And I'm sure that those are the kinds of guys he looks for and then works the contracts from that point forward. But I think without perfect knowledge, it's kind of hard to give him a grade anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right because if you can't be a GM and say I'm acquiring. I mean, this obviously is less, but this shows my age. But I'm going to acquire all 4-3 defensive ends at the expense of, and but you're running a 4-3, and you need 4-3 outside linebackers, not edge, not defensive end 4-3 ends. So you've got to, I mean, he's got to work around what the coaching staff is wants. And obviously Harbaugh's, I mean, 20 years in, he's very established. So it's not like he can just ignore that or it's going to cause a problem between those two. And ultimately Bisciotti has to decide between who he's keeping. So, I mean, they've got to work together that way for sure. Ultimately, it is DaCosta's, as Ozzy said, I'll listen to everybody in the room and then I'll make a decision. But it has to, scheme has to come into that, what the team is looking for, what the offensive line coach is looking for, what the offensive coordinator is looking for on the offensive line. Those all play in for sure.
You mentioned Roquan Smith and his contract, and I agree with you. When he signed that 5 year, $100 million contract, making him at the time the highest paid off the ball linebacker in the league, no one had a problem with it because he played really well. But he signed that deal when Patrick Queen was still around. And I thought maybe it was a coincidence that he had a decline in play when Queen left and he had Malik Harrison and Chris Board, filling in beside him, and Simpson just didn't seem to be the right guy at that time. But when you look at Roquan Smith, his performance has fallen off. He doesn't play as violently as he used to, and he doesn't play with the same sense of urgency that he once did. So we only saw that when he was healthy this season in one game, and that was against the Cleveland Browns, and we thought, oh well, maybe that guy's back. But so the reason that his contract looks like an albatross at this time is because number one, they've restructured it, and number two, he's not performing to the level of that contract. Let's talk about what his contract looks like next year, and if there's any flexibility at all with what they can do with Roquan Smith.
Yeah, so next year he's due basically 20 million in cash. None of it is guaranteed. So it's a $4 million roster bonus, which is usually due the fifth day of the league year. So sometime around March 20th. I haven't looked to see when the beginning of the league year is next year. And then $16 million salary. So that's the 20 million in cash. There is still though 25 million in dead money that would have to be addressed. Now his cap number is 32 million. So if they just move on from him and they straight cut him, there will be again almost 25.5 million in dead money, but there will be a little over 7 in cap savings. So this is where we always talk about, oh, well, that's a lot of dead money just for that amount of cap savings when you look at the two numbers in comparison. But the Ravens also have to make a quality judgment of, is he worth 20 million in cash? And if they don't feel he is, then it doesn't matter what the dead money versus the big, I mean, it's that the dead money is versus the cap savings, because there is a substantial cap savings there just the same. But a lot of times fans just look at the cap savings versus the dead money without factoring in the thought of, is the guy worth 20 million in cash? And this year, unless, I mean, at this point, after the last year and then the beginning of this year, I'm not sure that's the case. Um, well, obviously there's time to let that play out and see what happens. But yeah, I mean, I think there will definitely be a major discussion around him and several other players as we're going to get to. But next year, as far as are they worth it, both cap and cash wise?
Another tough one, Brian, is Nnamdi Madubuike. We didn't even know he was hurt in that game. I think it was against the Chiefs, wasn't it?
Or it might have been the Browns.
Well, you're right. It was the
I
Browns. It
think it
was.
was the Browns because I think he was fine. He came out of the game fine, and the next morning he was,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So he's got this serious neck injury that put him on IR for the season, and there are some, lingering clouds over that situation that suggest that it might be a career ender for him. So let's take that worst case scenario. A real shame for a really good guy too, and a really blossoming player, and a player that was a terrific player a couple of years ago. Last year had fallen off a little bit, but still, I think that had to do with a lot with double teams and Travis Jones being hurt. But those two together, there was a lot of promise that they were going to be able to push the pocket and help the edge guys. So maybe that's why they didn't invest as much in the edge. We're only speculating at this point, but let's talk worst case scenario with Madubuike. If his career is done, what does that look like on the Ravens books?
That's going to be ugly. Because because his salary, his $22 million salary for next year is fully guaranteed. So it's really a question of, so that leaves about 51, almost 52 million in dead money,
Wow.
that they would have to deal with. Now, that part of that, 22 million of that would go away if he retired. He's not obligated to retire. Um, and it is fully guaranteed money. Sometimes players do retire in that case. Derek Carr retired with guaranteed money on the table this past spring, but Derek Carr, being quarterback, had already made over 100 million. Madubuike isn't not made. He's just starting to hit his money now. So, we can't count on him, and I shouldn't say it that way because he's entitled to the money. So I shouldn't say count on him retiring. But if he does retire, it makes it a lot easier. They would probably do what they did with Michael Pierce's deal this past year when he was going to retire. They would reduce Madubuike's $22 million salary down to the minimum. It's technically backed up by a signing bonus if he changed his mind. And then the Ravens would still owe him the money. That way they can't pull the rug out from under him, so to speak. But then they would probably do a post June 1 release, just like they did with Pierce after June 1, then put him on the retirement list. And that would save them 22 million next year, and then spread out then it would be about 8 million, actually almost 9 million in dead money on the 26 cap, and then unfortunately, still about 20 million on the 27 cap. But that's your best case scenario, making the best out of a bad situation. Now, if he does not retire, he has a almost $31 million cap number in 26. My guess is, since they owe him, there's cutting him isn't going to do any good because his money's fully guaranteed. Releasing him even after June 1 isn't going to do him a lot of good. So my guess is he stays on their IR at the 31 million in 26, and then they do a post June run release the following year to spread out the balance of that, roughly 20 million between, or 21 million between 27 and 28. So again, you got the 51 million, you got to deal with it one way or another, and that's pretty much how they would have to deal with it. So unfortunately, I think that's probably the way. Now, I mean, he already counts 31 million. So when you're looking at cap numbers next year, he's already counting as that. So you're not going to see any savings next year unless he retires. And like I said, he's really under no obligation to do so.
Yeah, that's a real tough situation, particularly when you're dealing with a guy that's a good guy, worked real hard to get to where he is. And I just think about Madubuike, and I remember the COVID draft where DaCosta was calling him and how emotional he got after the Ravens made that pick. And, those kinds of stories, you like to see them end well. But, well, hopefully, and we'll say our prayers that
Yeah.
Brandon Madubuike doesn't have, that's not a career ending injury, that he could bounce back at some point in 2026. Moving on, Brian, I wanted to talk a little bit about Marlon Humphrey, too. Marlon's done, you probably know better than I do, a number of restructures, and those things, as we oftentimes refer to it, as kicking the can down the road. It's time to pick up that can. What's that can look like in 2026?
Yeah, so 2026 is the last year of his deal. There are void years in place after that. If he's cut next year, again, they would probably do some sort of arrangement to make that work out a little bit better. If he's cut outright, it's 19 million in dead money, 7 million in cap savings. Very similar to Roquan's numbers, actually. So that can be done. They could always make an arrangement with him to um, make it so that a post June 1 is possible. Right now, it's not technically possible because the void years accelerate upon release. Um, and you can't post June 1 those. It'd be kind of nice if they could. But they're going to have a couple of these guys. It's, you can't post June 1 everybody because you're just throwing a ton of cap space on your 27 cap. When I look at these three players that we're talking about, um, you know, I, I think I think this team is about to have a cap reset of some sort. Because when I look at the numbers, just in, because how's the easiest way to create space? Cut guys, and that creates dead money, but you're still creating cap savings, or restructures. There are only basically four players they can restructure next year. Lamar, who we hope has an extension because a restructure would make that number in 26 or 27, 28, I'm sorry, the 27, even worse. Madubuike, who may be injured and they may not be able to do anything with that. And the other two we just talked about, Roquan and Marlon. The next guy they could get any kind of cap savings by restructuring is Bateman, and that's almost less than 800,000 in cap savings by restructuring.
Mm.
So they're going to have to create space by extensions or cuts, and then obviously Lamar is the elephant in the room, but um, so they're not going to have a whole lot of wiggle room next year. And obviously, we all hope they get a Lamar extension. One, because it creates cap savings, and two, because it extends him, and we don't have to worry about this again for a couple more years. But yeah, it's not a pretty. I mean, people wanted them to go all in cap wise, and the way they structured deals with void years and Derrick Henry's going to be in the second year of his new deal and he's got a minimum salary. Stanley's going to be in the second year of his new deal and he's got a minimum salary. Usually those numbers go up. They've backloaded these deals a lot with a lot of these guys. Um, and that's going to, unfortunately, this is the go all in. And I mean, we can all say our piece about whether this is all in or not, but it certainly looked like it a month ago. But now here we are, and this is the downside of going all in, is it can create an ugly year or two. Hopefully not two, but I do feel like this could be a bit of a cap reset next year.
What do you expect the cap to be next year, and where do you project at the current time? I know it's not going to be accurate when the time comes, but where do you project the Ravens to be against that projected cap?
Well, right now they have 36 players under contract for next year. So that's a low number right by itself because 51, yeah, it doesn't even get you to the roll of 51. So you need 15 more players on a minimum salary to get to 51. So I've got them at about, and you got guys, earning escalators and things like that as well. I've got them at about 28 right now. If Lamar gets a new deal, you're probably creating another 30. So that sounds great right there. But again, that doesn't include, getting, I mean, that would, you're looking at almost 1 million per 15 players. So that takes just to get up to roll of 51. So that takes 15 million out of that right there. And as we see, it takes, 15 to 16 to 17 million in off-season expenses. I'm sorry, in-season expenses. Your practice squad and your injury replacements and stuff like that. So you're not looking at a whole lot of space there. Now that's with Roquan and Madubuike and Humphrey still under their present numbers. Whether they could, get them a shorter term extension to bring those numbers down, maybe in Marlon's case, I don't know. Pay cut here or there, maybe. Now you're looking at Stanley being, ankle injury again. Here we go again. His contract is brand new again, and here he is hurt. And nobody was complaining about that contract either because he looked like he had, cleared those issues. But it's football; you just never know.
Yeah, that's kind of a bleak picture, really, when you think about the fact that there are some guys that are coming up for new contracts too. Guys like Isaiah Likely and Tyler Linderbaum. How's that going to affect them? Where are they right now in 2025 with the cap?
So they got about 14 million in cap space right now. So they're in good. I mean, for this point of the season. So now that's money. If obviously it depends on what happens between now and the end of the season. But if they don't make any trade deadline moves, acquiring players at least, then that 14, barring any too many injuries from here on out, that's probably 10 to carry over. So that's nice, so that will be very helpful for next year. But that's a factor in, as the trade deadline comes up, and obviously, I mean, I think if, obviously we're at the bye week now, but if they lose, it's the Bears coming out of the bye, right?
It is, yes.
Yeah, if they somehow lose to the Bears at home, I mean, I think the season's over at that point. And then you're looking at maybe being a seller. You can perhaps create some cap space again to add to that carryover in the next year, which will help that somewhat bleak picture there.
So then guys like Linderbaum and Mark Andrews, they become trade targets of other teams that create space that the Ravens can carry into 2026.
I mean, I would certainly think with Andrews, yes, because I think you're going younger at that position. Linderbaum would surprise me, but that would, obviously they've not extended him yet. I don't know if that means they're close, but they haven't found the number, or they're really far apart. I guess if they're really far apart and they don't think they can afford him next year, then yeah, I would say probably, I mean, there's not a lot of cap savings there per se. Um, but that would be more about getting a fifth round, fourth round, third round draft pick, maybe fourth. I mean, for half of a season. Of course, that new team could. Well, you can't really tag. Well, they could tag him, I guess. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know how that one probably. And that's going to, like I said, that's going to depend on where they feel the negotiations are and if they can bridge a gap and keep him, or if they want to keep him. I mean, they've never paid a center, certainly top of the market, anywhere near top of the market money. Um, so that will be, that's one of those interesting ones to think about. But you've got Travis Jones. There's maybe somebody they work on it. They've always seemed to sign somebody in December, so maybe they work on those kind of guys with some of that surplus. Then try to use some of that money this year, so you're lessening the future money as far as the bonus proration, because you can prorate in 25, even the contract is pretty much starting in 26.
Yeah, and both of those guys, Brian, in my opinion, I think Tyler Linderbaum has had a substandard season, and and so too has Travis Jones.
Well, and I mean Jones has been injured, so yeah, I mean, but that seems to be starting to become a recurring theme with him. He was
Yes.
injured a lot last year, and now he is again this year. Um, So yeah, I mean, so yeah, how much they're missing him, how much I don't know that we all thought we'd miss Michael Pierce as much as we have, but and I'm not just talking about his, he and Urban, the entertainment on the sidelines, but and maybe it's more than just that, but I mean, he's from the run defense, he's the one guy that's not there, and obviously the run defense has been very substandard for Ravens, for the Ravens, the way they play defense.
You brought up a really interesting point a minute ago, talking about that Bears game, and now that I'm processing that, I think you're spot on. I think they don't do anything until they see what happens in that game. Now, if they win that game, and say the Steelers lose to the Browns on Thursday night or to the Bengals on Thursday night, then maybe they think, okay, we still have a shot at this division because we play the Steelers twice, and let's take a stab at somebody. But if the Ravens lose to the Bears, it's done. I
Yeah,
can't
yeah, yeah.
I can't imagine them rallying from a 1-6 record. I know there's only been four teams that have done it from 1-5. I think that the odds dropped
Yeah.
significantly to 1-6.
Yeah. Yeah, and you hear people, they got to acquire this guy, and certainly talking heads on the radio to an extent. They got to do this now. They got to do this now. They got to do this now. Well, other teams don't know if they want to trade guys either. You know, I mean, if the Ravens are, if the Ravens are 1-8 at the trade deadline, they'll probably look to trade Mark Andrews. Right now, they don't want to trade Mark Andrews,
Right.
probably because he's going to be a big part of them getting out of this hole. So, and obviously, as you recounted who the teams are in the playoffs right now, who are teams we did not expect to be in the playoffs. Those could have been teams that were sellers, that we expected to be sellers. The Colts, they're the number one seed. Who would have thunk that? So, so now you take teams that you expected to be sellers that aren't sellers, and you took teams that expected to be buyers like the Chiefs, the Bills, us maybe, and they're not going to be, and we're further back than them. But we're in a position now, they're in a position that they still think they have a chance. So I think you're right now with this topsy turviness. The number of sellers is the Browns and um
Titans.
the Titans. Yeah, there you go. The Titans would be the perfect one. Maybe we can get Zeitler back for a seventh round pick. But those kind. So I mean, there aren't that many. So very few teams. And I hate hearing that on the I hate hearing that on the radio from people who are supposed to be pretty darn knowledgeable, talking about they got to make a move immediately. Who's available? You got to have somebody available, And I don't think anybody. I don't know who's available right now. I mean, the Oway I mean, that was. I know that came out of the blue for everybody, and seemingly, at least in the secondary, that helped. Obviously, it didn't help the pass rush, but Oway hasn't done much anyway. So that was kind of a one-off. How many major? There haven't been any major trades yet, and I don't think they're going to be till the deadline because who knows who's going to be available.
Brian, all this talk that we're exchanging right now is very bleak for the Ravens, but it is the reality.
Unfortunately,
Meanwhile,
yeah.
meanwhile, number 8 sits back there and watches all this unfold. And you forecasted this a year ago when you saw the cap numbers. They basically were suggesting we are going to extend Lamar in 2026 because that's why that number's set that way. That's a phony number because we're going to extend him. Well, the cost to do that have risen dramatically, in my opinion, because of all the things we just discussed. Because he's watching on the field what happens, how much. I don't know that there's a singular player in the NFL whose team is dependent upon that player as much as the Ravens are, Lamar Jackson, for all the things he does. He makes a bad offensive line look substandard, but not even average, I don't think. But his miraculous skill set allows them to get away with it. And then they Derrick Henry isn't as good without Lamar Jackson on the field, and the defense isn't as good because they're on the field more. And all these things just sort of snowball. Oh, and by the way, besides that almost $75 million cap figure that sits on the books in 2026, if they're going to extend him, it's going to cost even more because guess what? They don't have the ability to franchise tag him when his contract is over in 27. Talk about all the cards being on his side of the table. I don't know how it could shape up any better for him, from a contract standpoint.
Well, the only way it could have, and was the one I was more thinking was more possible or more likely, was they would win a Super Bowl this year.
Okay,
And
yeah.
then I've said this to you before, and I've said this plenty of places that, he would have every right at that point to demand a fully guaranteed contract, and it would be really hard for the Ravens not to do that. This is the flip side of that, but also showing just how important he is. I'm not sure without winning a Super Bowl, I don't know if you can demand fully guaranteed contract, but it certainly has shown, as you said, just how valuable he is. I saw some jokes, and not just from Ravens fans, but after the way the Bills played last night and Allen played, that something about him giving his and watching, comparing, him having a healthy team and still not being able to get it done, and comparing the Ravens to falling apart without Lamar, that maybe he should be giving his MVP back, that Allen should be giving that MVP back and give it to Lamar for last year, because now we see just how important Lamar is.
And we really get to see the ebbs and flows of an NFL season because things can change a lot. And we've said this so many times. It really seems to come down to, and the Ravens won 2 Super Bowls this way, who gets hot at the right time.
Yeah.
So, with all that said about Lamar, I think that it's building up even without that Super Bowl. I'm sure that the starting point of negotiations is a fully guaranteed contract.
Probably. Yeah, probably. And whether he'll back down from that, but he does have, he's got the Ravens. I mean, this was the off season for the Ravens perspective, this was the off season to get a deal done before it got to that point. But now he will have, not just in the numbers wise because of the $75 million cap numbers and the no tag clause in a few years, but now seeing what they look like without him. And we haven't touched on this, but I think a lot of people, and a lot of people want to see it happen, and I think a lot of people who may not necessarily want to see it happen, but are just expecting it to happen, that unless they rebound really, really strongly, this will be that this will be that Harbaugh and Ravens, agree to separate by, mutual agreement. He won't get fired, but he'll just, step out, and they'll figure out the money between them quietly. Um, and, but then Lamar has a lot of say in, well, I want a contract, so I want to say, and I don't know, I don't know with Lamar's personality. I don't know, you know, he's hard to pinpoint. I don't know if he'd be like, I want this coach, or this is the kind of guy I want, or if he's just like, no, this is what, like, I'm in on this discussion, or this is kind of what I would like to see, and you guys figure it out from there. And I don't know, how involved he would want to get, but it'd be hard for, if he says, I want to be involved in the coaching search, or I'm not signing a contract, I don't know how they can't involve him.
I've had this asked of me too, Brian, that, why, if Lamar can see that they're so weak at guard, and if he wants the better offensive line, why doesn't he go ahead and do this extension so that they can free up some money to go and improve that? You just do have to still have to find the players, but at that point in time, at least they might have some cap space to be able to go out and do that. So why wouldn't he do that if he really wants to get that Super Bowl like he said he wanted to when he was drafted back in 2018? And I don't know that it's as easy as that. It's a lot more complex than just saying that he's, because people will point to, well, Tom Brady did it and Patrick Mahomes did it. Why can't Lamar Jackson do it to help win Super Bowls, and then use those Super Bowl wins to leverage bigger deals going forward. And that might work out, might sound nice and clean on paper, but sometimes the real world doesn't follow a well-conceived plan.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Brady had his, his millionaire or whatever, multi-millionaire model wife. Mahomes is getting paid now. The deal, the structure of the deal allowed it, but he was still getting paid. But the reason we talk about those two are because those two are the outliers. Um, most, I mean, it's easy as a fan to say, well, the players should do this. How much money do you need? But when you're at the top level of a sport, there's a reason you're at the top level, and that is you compete for everything, you know, and there, and part of that is salary too, and it's. I mean, I get, I say it sometimes too. I wish, how much do you need, but it's a different. As a fan, it's not a mindset we will ever understand unless you're that guy or those guys, so to speak. Most guys don't give up money. They'll restructure a deal because it's the same amount of money, but when it comes to extending, it's harder. And these kind of deals are. I mean, Allen just redid his deal, and they basically. I mean, that was a huge step up for him because they basically tore the old deal up and started over as opposed to, so that was basically a whole new deal. It wasn't really an extension, which created a whole all new numbers. Because usually when you extend, you're adding to a lesser number with a lesser APY that's left on that old deal because a lot of the money's already been paid. So when you say, okay, well, the new money is the amount of what comes in because of the new 3 years, but the old money isn't the same amount because it's the leftovers from the prior deal after all the bonuses and guaranteed money have been paid. So but those kind of deals, um, you know, it, players rarely take less unless they have to, unless they're at the end of their career or they're coming off of injuries, and like Stanley did 2 years ago. But other than that, they take the money, and Lamar being his own agent is it makes it more difficult, because you gotta go to him, and if they could, if he had an agent, DaCosta could be talking to the agent right now, and Lamar could be out of it until they get to some point the agent says, yeah, okay, I think this might work. Let me take it to Lamar. But Lamar's out of it. He doesn't have to think about it. Well, you got a quarterback trying to figure out, the game plan and get healthy and things like that. You can't really take a contract offer to him now. It just doesn't work.
Well, that's a challenge. And a lot of times these players will say, since we didn't do it before the season started, I don't want to talk about it until the season's over. So,
Right. But if you make the right offer to the agent during the season, they're going to
right.
take it. But in this case, you can't. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they are talking, but I think that's really difficult to do when the player doesn't have an agent. I'm not criticizing Lamar because, I mean, he's got he's 3 years into this deal and he's got holding all the cards. So
Yeah.
he did amazingly. So I'm not criticizing him in any way, shape, or form.
Doesn't seem like he needed that agent.
No, no, not at all.
So you mentioned we're talking about extensions, and you mentioned John Harbaugh a moment ago, and I think it was in March of this year he signed a 3-year extension, which I believe has him under contract with the Ravens. Is it through 2028?
I believe that's true because it was so 5, 6, 7, 8. Yes, yeah, because he would have been a lame duck this year, if not. Yeah,
Okay, and that, from what I was reading, is at 17 mil per. Does that sound right to you?
I think. Yeah, I don't remember, but I think that sounds about. Yeah, I think that sounds about right.
Okay, so you're looking at, besides this year, $54 million on the table for John Harbaugh. If if they were to mutually agree to part ways, I don't think Harbaugh's done with coaching, number one. But if they mutually agreed to part ways and they did not come to an agreement on a buyout, and he just gets his 17 million per over the next 3 years, and then he goes and signs with another club. Does he get all that money from the Ravens, or is it offset by what he signs with another club?
Yeah, it would depend on the contract. Usually they're offsets, although, and given the size of the numbers, I would think there's offsets. It might not be 100%. Um, but yeah, I would think they're offsets. I mean, but he's 20 years in, so you kind of get the ability. And obviously, when they were doing this deal back in the spring, nobody envisioned that it could become an issue already. So and it may not be all fully guaranteed either. My guess is it probably is because of his tenure.
Mhm.
Um, if this was his first contract and he's, a year or two into it of a 5-year deal, it's probably not fully guaranteed if you're a rookie head coach. But obviously, his tenure, I think, probably is, or most of it is. I would think there's some offsets given those numbers. I would think there's some offsets, but offsets only do so much. I mean, he gets 5 million from another team. You're still paying a good chunk of the 17, obviously 12 million. The Ravens would still be footing the bill on. So, and then it's a question of is it offsets just for um, is it offsets just for NFL jobs? Is it offsets for college jobs? Is it offsets for TV, which isn't going to be a whole lot because TV is not going to come anywhere near 17 million. Even if he was, I don't know if he would be inclined to do TV. I know I saw earlier today something about James Franklin was his deal after getting fired at Penn State had offsets and required him to go get a job. Now, I don't know what the parameters of a job in coaching or broadcast. Now, I
I
don't
was
know
gonna say,
what the parameters are. I don't know how you enforce that, but and I don't know that Harbaugh's deal would have that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, Billick sat out for a couple years, and before he even decided to start looking for jobs, and then I think at that point the league had passed him, yeah, and he got into broadcasting. But further, I guess the first 2 years he just sat and collected the Ravens check.
Brian, a little over 6 weeks ago, the Ravens were up 40-25 with 5 minutes to go in the game in Buffalo. We were feeling pretty good about the season, right?
Yeah, well, I was in
Wow,
LA.
this
I
is
was in
a shitstorm.
Yeah, I was in LA at the Oasis concert at that moment at the Rose Bowl, and at least I didn't have to pay attention to it and see it before. I was still stunned when I pulled my phone out after the concert and looked and said, "What the hell happened?" But at least I didn't have to experience it. But yeah, that's like the high water mark of the probably going to be the high water mark of the season.
Who would have thought it 6 weeks later? This has
Yeah,
been incredible. And then add to that, Brian, what we went through with the Orioles.
yeah. Yeah, both teams you expected to be, contenders and, serious contenders, and here we go.
Last question I have for you, and this is another thing that I am asked a lot because I have somewhat of a relationship with him, did some shows with him, and people want to know why haven't we heard the public heard from Steve Bisciotti as both somebody that covers the team and somebody that's a fan of the team. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, he obviously used to do the annual press conference, sometime in, um, after the season ended, before the new league year started, so usually in February or something like that. And he would obviously do some, one-offs. I like that he's not overly involved, and I'm not saying he's not involved. I'm sure behind the scenes, he's, what the hell happened? Why did we do this? Why didn't we do that? I mean, you obviously know him more personally than I do, but that seems like that was his personality, wanting answers, not necessarily saying I'm firing everybody, but how did we get here kind of, and what can we do so that we don't get back here? What do we do to we get out of this? I would have to assume that if if Harbaugh leaves, whatever you want to call it, however, pushed out, fired, mutual agreement, whatever, goes and takes a job at UCLA, I don't know, something like that, on his own. I would assume we would hear from him then, things are, when things are going well, and I know the playoff, we've had some pretty awful playoff, catastrophes, for lack of a better word. But the team was good, and the next season was expected you're going to be good. So I didn't, it'd be nice to hear from him, but I don't know, unless you're firing somebody, or unless you're, as he said, what was it? He liked holding, was it Cameron's feet to the fire? Was it Cameron's feet to the fire?
Yes.
Okay, so that was probably one of the last times he did one of those. Um, you know, um, eh, and it's tough for owners and coaches, all of them. You do a press conference, they, somebody picks out a snippet of it without the whole explanation, and it, like when Flacco said he wanted, he thought he was the best quarterback in the league, and everybody's like, you're terrible, you're not the best. But what do you expect a player to say, those kinds of things. So I don't know if if he shied away from it, from that. They obviously got a lot of bad press, and certainly in some ways deservedly so. It's not, maybe more in some ways, but over the Ray Rice thing, when they did a lot of things publicly, and did, some of the actions didn't back up the words, or vice versa, whichever way you want to look at it. So I don't know if that's part of the reason, or if he just feels, Harbaugh's established, Acosta's established, Ozzie was established. I don't really need to speak. Let my football people speak. But I would think we will hear, if this season continues the way it is. I don't know how we don't hear from him, and if we don't, I will certainly be disappointed in that case.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly said, and I agree with you because things haven't been at a point where they are now, a point of desperation where they feel like they needed to hear from Bisciotti. And I think the need to hear from Bisciotti is driven by the fact that they're struggling, by the fact that so many people want Harbaugh gone, and there's now a growing number of people that want EDC gone. So when all that
Yeah.
frustration settles in, who else is there left? It's Steve Bisciotti, and they want to hear
Right.
from him.
And he's the boss. Yeah. I mean, he ultimately he makes these decisions. It's not going to be DaCosta firing Harbaugh. It's Bisciotti firing, in conversation with DaCosta, and Sashi, and probably Dick Cass to an extent too. Um, but and Ozzy, yeah, I mean all those guys. So I mean, that's some pretty good names right there to rely on, and that's what I think he's done over the years. You don't need to hear from me. These guys are my guys, and if what they say is what the team wants, what the team feels. So you don't need to hear it from me. But when there's a huge changeover, when there's things have fallen apart, and very unexpectedly so, then I think you have to hear from them, and I would think you would, and like I said, I'd be disappointed if we didn't.
I'm not like his buddy or anything like that. I've spent some time with him and had some dinners with him, but at the same time, what I know about him is that he's extremely competitive, and I can tell you this rips at his gut. And I do have mutual friends that have been in his box during game days, and they just leave him alone because he can get so undone with the things that are going on in the field. If things aren't going well, that people just don't want to be around him, and he doesn't want people around him either. So he's an ultimate competitor. So for people that think that he's not, and he doesn't care, that's not true. For people that think that all he cares about is raking in money from the Ravens, well, he makes his real money outside of the Ravens, not with the Baltimore Ravens. I can tell you that too.
Yeah, I mean, his money in the Ravens is the investment. I mean, obviously, it's in his family's investment. His family's, not that his family needed extra money in the future, but I mean that's where most owners are making money off the team, unless it is more of a, sorry about the dog there, unless it is more of a family, like the Bengals or something like that, where the wealth, that the owner's wealth is the mystic, where the owner's wealth is the team. I mean,
This is well,
Bisciotti doesn't need the Ravens to make money.
Right, right. So, that's just how it is with like Bisciotti, and he's that competitor, and you think that when he goes out there as he did on Sunday and sees Tom Brady and Ray Lewis on the field, and then looks around the stadium and sees it half empty, you don't think that that gnaws at him? You don't think that you want to talk about money? You put people in the stands, then they're all out there buying concessions, they're buying parking, they're doing everything else in the community that spending money. Not that that goes into his pocket, but it all builds up this aura about the team, and that is not existent right now. And so to think that he isn't bothered by that, that's very naive.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't yeah, I don't the one we've done shows, we've done articles on the being called cheap. They're back. They had that last year was a down year. This year they spent plenty of cash. The years before they had spent cash. They always spend to the cap. People are like, why do we never have any cap money? Is cap space? Well, that's because they're spending to the cap. I mean, why do these other teams have cap space? Well, because they're not. So yeah, I don't have any concerns about that. The biggest concerns now are figuring out a way to hopefully get back in this playoff race. But if not, how to navigate the rest of this year from a player acquisition, player trade. I mean, I know, and I'm sure it'll be, if they start trading the Linderbaums or like as you suggested, people are going to be, why are they trading him? They're trying to get rid of money. They don't want to sign him next year. Well, as we've detailed, it's not going to be a very pretty picture next year.
Yeah. Well, we never have a lack of topics to discuss, Brian.
No, that's for sure.
So, did we leave out anything so far today?
No, I think we got it covered for now. Yeah, and hopefully I'll have to start writing. Hopefully, I won't have to start writing my off-season
Oh
preview articles too soon. Yeah, October is a little early for that. But and I still won't. It still won't be published till December because there's no reason to worry about it at this point. But yeah, it's not a pretty situation. People wanted to go all in. This is unfortunately the downside of it. Sometimes it works, sometimes, and honestly, most of the time it doesn't. I mean, if you look at other teams that have tried, I mean, teams that the Saints did it for years, Green Bay did it, trying to get one more with Rodgers. The Browns have done it repeatedly. I know the Eagles succeeded in it, and the Rams for the most part succeeded in it too, even though they had a couple down years afterward. They're back up now. So, but this is the downside to putting all the chips in is you may have to take a step back. If you don't get it, the Rams got it and they had to take a step back. The Packers took a couple steps back and now they're back in it, and they've got these, their cap is a lot cleaner now. So, sometimes you have to do that. And um I mean, but the key is getting Lamar done. And if once that's done, that will make things a lot more clear. It's just a matter of, is that, sometime this year into the season, or is it after the season, and how long does it take? Because if it takes into next April or May, they're not going to be able to do much of anything.
Yeah, wasn't there a guy on local radio that talked about cash over cap and that the salary cap wasn't real?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, he needs
Yeah.
to look at the Ravens
Yeah,
2020.
yeah. Well, yeah. Every there's a I have two X threads, with one with a small group of cap guys and another with a big group of cap guys. Um, and yeah, everybody laughs at that. It laughs at that kind of comment, like the cap's not real. You can manipulate the cap for sure, but at some point you have to deal with it. And if you don't, I mean, that's what the Saints are doing now. I mean, look at them.
Yes.
They pushed and pushed and pushed. And there were Saint fans that kept saying, "Oh, we'll get out of this. We'll get out of this. We just keep pushing a little further, a little further." Well, here they are, and they can't. There was no pushing it any further, and you got to take this step back. And another team, and it's escaping my mind, that's in, in pretty bad cap shape, and they don't have a whole lot of options. So so at some point and most teams that are going to have I mean, the Steelers had to do it the last couple of years after Roethlisberger was gone, because they had pushed the cap numbers out for him so far, and kept pushing and pushing. And that's why they, until now, have had, dregs of quarterbacks.
Ryan, thanks for your time today, brother.
Sure, sure. Have a bourbon.
So that about does it for us on this edition of the Front Office. Thanks for tuning in.